The sun hung low over the vast arid plains, casting long, jagged shadows across the dusty earth. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and the distant howl of a coyote, but nothing could drown out the desperation in the boy's voice. Can you take her instead of me?" he asked, his words trembling with both fear and resolve. The boy's eyes, dark and filled with unspoken stories, flicked nervously toward the rancher standing a few yards away. His sister, barely older than a child, clutched his sleeve, her small hand shaking as she sensed the danger that had brought them to this moment. The rancher, a man of few words and sharper instincts, said nothing at first. His gaze swept over the barren landscape, noting the telltale signs of movement footprints in the dust, the distant glimmer of horse hooves on the horizon. Danger was near, and it was closing fast. Yet he remained silent, his jaw tight, weighing the boy's plea against the risks he himself would face. He could see the fear in the sister's eyes, a mirror of the boy's own, but also the trust that clung stubbornly to her even in the face of peril. That silent trust was enough to tip the balance. Without a word, the rancher moved, swift and deliberate. He unfastened his horse, slinging the reins over the pommel, and turned to the children. The boy's hope flared, but he did not speak. He only watched, waiting for the inevitable refusal. Instead, the rancher signaled with a single nod, and the children realized they were going with him, both of them. Relief and fear collided in their hearts, a confusing tangle of emotions. There would be no choosing who survived and who did not. He was taking them both, and that act of quiet courage spoke louder than any words. The journey began under a sky streaked with the reds and oranges of sunset. The rancher led them along narrow paths, avoiding the main trails where danger would likely track them. Every sound, a snapping twig, a distant animal cry, made the boy flinch, and the girl buried her face into her brother's side, trembling. The rancher's presence was a constant reassurance, though he offered no comfort through words. His actions spoke for him. He rode at the front, scanning the horizon, alert to every potential threat, while guiding the children with gentle hand signals, pulling them close when the terrain became treacherous. Hours passed as the trio navigated canyons and ridges, the boy slowly absorbing the rancher's quiet lessons in survival. Watch where you step. Listen before you leap. Trust your instincts, but trust your allies more. Each narrow escape, each careful decision, strengthened a bond that words could not define. The girl began to mimic his movements instinctively, learning which rocks were safe to step on, which shadows might conceal danger. She learned courage by example, while her brother's protective instincts softened into something deeper trust in someone else's strength. Night fell, and the first stars blinked above, scattered like tiny points of hope across the black expanse. They huddled near a sparse copse of trees, the rancher keeping watch while the children rested, exhausted yet alive. The boy dared to meet his sister's gaze and whispered, "We're safe." "For now," she nodded, still clinging to him, but something had changed. There was a new understanding, a new sense that survival did not rest solely on his shoulders anymore. The rancher's silent decision had altered their fate, and as they drifted into uneasy sleep, the threat of the world still loomed, but so did the promise of protection, and the beginning of an unspoken bond that might carry them through what was yet to come. The desert night was cold and unrelenting, a sharp contrast to the sweltering heat of the day. The rancher kept watch as the boy and his sister slept, their faces pale and drawn, shadows of fear still lingering in their expressions. Every rustle of the wind through the scrub or distant coyote howl kept him alert. Danger was never far in these lands, and the boy's plea still echoed in his mind. He had taken both children, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders as the first gray light of dawn crept over the horizon. The rancher nudged the children awake. They were stiff and sore from the night spent on hard earth, but the sight of him, calm and resolute, gave them courage. "We move," he said quietly, and without question the children obeyed. The boy, still clutching his sister's hand, followed the rancher across the uneven terrain. Today, survival would demand more than trust. It would demand courage, quick thinking, and reliance on instincts sharpened by necessity. By mid-morning, they had reached a rocky ridge that overlooked the valley below. From this vantage, the rancher could see the tracks of others, likely the ones who had made the boy plead for his sister's safety. He studied the tracks carefully, noting the direction, spacing, and depth. They weren't far behind, and the threat was growing more imminent with each passing hour. The boy's face tightened with fear as he followed the rancher's movements. "Are they close?" he asked in a whisper. The rancher simply shook his head and continued moving, his silence teaching the boy a lesson in patience and observation. Suddenly, a sharp cry shattered the stillness. The girl had stumbled, scraping her knee against a hidden rock. Pain and fear made her freeze, tears welling in her eyes. The rancher moved instantly, crouching to her level, inspecting the wound with careful hands. "It's minor," he said, more to reassure himself than her. Bandaging it with a scrap of cloth from his pack, he demonstrated efficiency and calm that both children clung to. "We keep going," he said, helping her to her feet. The boy's anxiety eased slightly, seeing that the rancher's presence was more than protection. It was guidance, a steadying force against the chaos of the world around them. As the morning wore on, the trio moved through narrow canyons and over dry riverbeds, the landscape testing their endurance and resolve. The rancher taught them how to identify edible plants and locate small pools of water, knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death. Each step, each lesson, reinforced the bond forming between them. The children, who had relied solely on one another, began to trust him implicitly, following his silent commands without question. By mid-afternoon, a distant cloud of dust caught the rancher's eye. Bandits, or perhaps other settlers with less than honorable intentions. He led the children behind a boulder, crouching low, motioning for them to stay silent. His eyes scanned the horizon, calculating distances and routes. The children, hearts pounding, mimicked his caution, realizing the full weight of the danger they had narrowly escaped the previous night. For the first time, fear was tempered by understanding. They were learning not just to survive, but to survive together. As the day faded toward evening, they finally reached a hidden grove, a small refuge where the trees shielded them from view. Exhausted, they collapsed onto the ground, relief mingling with the lingering tension. The boy glanced at the rancher, admiration and gratitude softening his wary eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, almost afraid to break the fragile peace. The rancher nodded silently, understanding the unspoken bond forming between them. This journey was far from over, but together they had begun to navigate the perilous path ahead, each step a testament to courage, trust, and the quiet power of one man's decision to protect two innocent lives. The night air was heavy with tension as the trio huddled in the hidden grove. The boy and his sister tried to sleep, but every rustle of leaves, every distant howl, reminded them that danger was never far. The rancher remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the shadows for any hint of movement. He had learned early that hesitation in these lands could mean disaster, and tonight, caution was his most vital ally. Before dawn, he stirred the children quietly. "We move before sunrise," he whispered, his voice low and deliberate. The boy nodded, sensing the urgency. The sister, still clutching her brother's sleeve, followed without question. They moved silently through the grove, stepping over roots and loose rocks, the rancher leading them along a hidden path only he seemed to know. Every step was measured, deliberate. Every sound was a potential threat. The boy realized that survival was more than escaping, it was predicting, Understanding and staying one step ahead. By mid-morning, the trio reached a narrow canyon. The walls rose sharply on either side, shadows deepening the already tense atmosphere. It was here that the first confrontation occurred. A small group of riders emerged, their faces obscured by scarves and wide-brimmed hats, weapons glinting in the sun. The boy froze, the sister pressing herself against him. But the rancher's calm steadied them. Without a word, he guided them behind a natural rock formation, positioning himself between the danger and the children. The bandits demanded the children, their voices harsh and threatening. The boy's heart pounded in his chest, but the rancher didn't flinch. Instead, he studied the terrain, noting the angles of attack, the potential escape routes, the weaknesses in their opponent's formation. Then, with calculated precision, he acted. A sudden movement, a swift draw of his revolver, a shot that rang out sharp and commanding, and the bandits faltered. Fear replaced confidence in their eyes as they realized the rancher was not a man to be underestimated. The children watched, a mixture of awe and relief flooding through them. For the first time, they understood the depth of the rancher's abilities, not just his physical skill, but his calm under pressure, his ability to assess and act decisively. The boy clutched his sister's hand tighter, feeling a protective power larger than his own. The bandits, sensing the resolve of the man before them, eventually retreated, disappearing over the ridge, leaving only dust in their wake. Breathing heavily, the rancher checked the children for injuries. Minor scrapes, nothing serious, but their shaken expression spoke volumes. He knelt down, placing a reassuring hand on each of their shoulders. "We keep moving," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "They won't give up easily, and neither can we." The boy nodded, the weight of responsibility now shared. He had begun to understand that the rancher was more than a rescuer. He was a guide, a protector, and someone whose quiet authority commanded respect. The rest of the day was spent navigating treacherous terrain, the trio moving swiftly but cautiously. The rancher taught them practical skills along the way, how to read tracks in the dirt, how to find water in unlikely places, how to stay silent even in the presence of potential danger. Each lesson was embedded with trust, each action a demonstration of survival instincts honed over years in the harsh wilderness. As evening fell, they found a secluded ridge overlooking a valley, a temporary sanctuary. The boy and his sister were exhausted but alive, their understanding of courage and resilience deepened by the events of the day. The rancher remained vigilant, yet a rare softness crossed his features as he looked at the children. He knew the journey ahead would be filled with even greater challenges, but for now they had survived together. The bond forged in silence, in fear, and in courage was stronger than ever. And the trio faced the next day not as a helpless child and a stranger, but as a small, determined unit ready to endure whatever came next. The dawn broke slowly, painting the horizon in soft shades of gold and pink. The rancher, as always, was already alert, scanning the land for signs of movement. The boy and his sister stirred, still weary from the day's confrontation, but slowly adapting to the rhythm of survival under his guidance. Their trust in him had grown. Though neither spoke it aloud, actions mattered more than words in this unforgiving landscape. They continued along the ridge, careful to stay off visible trails. The rancher's knowledge of the terrain was evident. He moved with silent precision, finding paths that minimized exposure while maximizing the chance of spotting threats before they could strike. The children followed, hesitant but learning quickly, stepping over roots and loose stones, watching his every movement. The boy's protective instincts were still strong, but now they were tempered with admiration and understanding of the rancher's capability. By late morning, they descended into a narrow valley hidden by dense brush and boulders. It offered some relief, a temporary sanctuary where they could rest without being easily seen. The rancher motioned for them to keep low and follow him to a small, clear stream running through the valley. He knelt beside it, showing the children how to drink safely and refill their water bottles without leaving traces that could alert pursuers. The sister's hands trembled slightly as she followed his instructions, but he encouraged her gently, and a small smile flickered across her face. Pride mingled with relief. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed across the valley. The boy's heart leaped, fear gripping him as he scanned the hills. The rancher's eyes narrowed, and he silently assessed the source of the noise. It was a hunting party, likely locals, possibly tracking the children or scouting the area. His calm presence was unwavering as he signaled for the children to stay hidden behind rocks and brush. Every movement now required precision. One false step could draw attention and risk everything. Hours passed in tense silence. The children remained crouched, muscles aching, eyes straining to follow even the smallest sign of movement. The rancher moved stealthily, using his knowledge of the terrain to stay concealed, watching the outsiders' movements, waiting for the perfect moment to move without confrontation. His patience and skill impressed the boy, who realized that survival was not always about fighting. It was about strategy, timing, and awareness. By afternoon, the hunters moved on, unaware of the trio's presence. The rancher allowed the children a moment to stretch and eat, emphasizing the importance of conserving energy for the journey ahead. The boy, though exhausted, began to mirror the rancher's methods, scanning, observing, thinking ahead. The sister, too, showed signs of resilience, learning to anticipate danger and respond calmly under guidance. Their growth, subtle but profound, was a testament to the rancher's quiet leadership and the trust they had developed in him. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley, the rancher led them to a higher ridge for the night. From there, they could see the surrounding plains, identifying potential threats long before they approached. Around the campfire that night, he allowed a rare moment of warmth, teaching them a few simple survival skills while sharing a story from his past, one that hinted at why he had become the man capable of such courage and patience. The boy and his sister listened, captivated not just by the story, but by the presence of someone who had chosen to protect them without hesitation, someone who had altered their lives with a single, silent decision. As they settled to sleep, the stars overhead casting a blanket of quiet across the valley, the bond between them grew stronger. Fear still lingered, but so did hope, the understanding that together, under the rancher's guidance, they could endure whatever dangers awaited them in the harsh wilderness. The morning air was crisp and carried the faint scent of desert sage. The rancher stirred first, as always, and checked the surroundings before waking the children. The boy and his sister had grown more accustomed to the rhythm of survival, yet every day presented new challenges that tested their endurance and courage. Today, the rancher intended to push them further, not recklessly, but deliberately, to teach them resilience. They traveled through a narrow canyon, its walls steep and jagged, casting deep shadows that shifted with the rising sun. The boy's pace was slower than the rancher's, his legs aching from the previous days of constant movement. The sister stumbled occasionally, clutching her brother's hand for support. The rancher remained patient, adjusting his speed, offering guidance with subtle gestures rather than words. He knew that fear could paralyze them, but careful encouragement could make them stronger. Mid-morning, they reached a shallow riverbed, dry in most places but with a few scattered pools of water. The rancher stopped, crouching near one of the pools. "We need water," he said simply, demonstrating how to filter and drink without drawing attention. The children followed his instructions, marveling at the small yet vital skill he had taught them. Each lesson built confidence, a sense that survival was achievable even in the harshest conditions. As they moved further along the canyon, A sudden crack echoed above a falling rock triggered by unseen movement. The boy froze, fear overtaking him, while the sister let out a small cry. The rancher reacted instantly, positioning himself between the children and the danger, guiding them to a safer path. The incident left them shaken but alive, reinforcing a hard truth. The world they navigated demanded constant vigilance. The rancher's calm in the face of danger became a lesson in courage, demonstrating that fear could be acknowledged without allowing it to dictate action. By afternoon, they emerged from the canyon into an open plain. The vastness was both liberating and terrifying. The rancher's eyes scanned the horizon, noting tracks that could belong to their pursuers or wandering predators. He paused, kneeling to examine the ground, showing the children how to interpret footprints, broken twigs, and displaced stones. The boy's curiosity sharpened into focus, his protective instincts now tempered with awareness. The sister, too, began to mimic the rancher's careful observations, realizing that survival was as much about seeing as it was about moving. Suddenly, distant voices carried across the plain. The boy stiffened, recognizing the tone of authority and aggression. It was the bandits who had threatened them days before. The rancher motioned for silence, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the safest route to avoid confrontation. They moved with deliberate stealth, keeping low, using every dip and rise in the terrain as cover. The children followed his lead, their trust complete, knowing that their lives depended on his judgment. As evening approached, the rancher found a secluded copse of trees near a rocky outcrop, offering protection from view and potential attack. He allowed the children a moment to rest, eat, and regain some strength, but never let his guard down. The boy glanced at him, realizing that the rancher's endurance and composure were as essential as the skills he had taught. The sister, quiet for once, leaned against a rock, exhausted yet reassured. The firelight flickered across their faces, illuminating the shared relief and unspoken bond that had grown steadily through hardship. Tonight, unlike previous nights, the trio slept with one eye open, aware that the world was full of dangers, but confident that together, under the rancher's guidance, they could face them. The journey had already tested their courage, patience, and trust, and tomorrow promised even greater challenges, but the bond formed through survival, quiet heroism, and mutual reliance would carry them forward. The morning sun crept over the horizon, spilling golden light across the rugged landscape. The rancher, already awake, scanned the terrain with practiced precision. The children stirred slowly, their muscles aching from days of constant travel. The boy rubbed his eyes, glancing at his sister, whose small frame was tense with worry. The previous days had taught them that rest was fleeting and danger was relentless. The rancher signaled for them to move, and they followed in silence. His movements were deliberate, each step carefully calculated to minimize exposure. The canyon they had crossed yesterday gave way to rolling plains dotted with scrub and boulders. The boy's steps faltered as fatigue set in, but the rancher's steady pace inspired him to keep going. He had begun to internalize the unspoken lessons of endurance, patience, and vigilance. By late morning, a distant cloud of dust caught the rancher's eye. He stopped abruptly, crouching low behind a boulder and motioning for the children to do the same. The boy's heart raced. He recognized the movement patterns instantly. It was the bandits, closing in faster than anticipated. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but the rancher's calm, unyielding presence grounded him. The sister clutched his hand tightly, her fear mirrored in his own. Yet trust in the rancher kept them rooted. The rancher scanned the surrounding terrain. Ahead was a narrow, rocky pass, a potential bottleneck to slow their pursuers. He led them cautiously toward it, keeping them low and silent. The bandits' voices grew louder, their impatience palpable. The boy realized that evasion required not just stealth, but strategic thinking. He followed the rancher's subtle gestures, learning instinctively how to move without drawing attention. As they entered the pass, a loose rock underfoot tumbled down the slope with a sharp clatter. The bandits paused, their voices rising as they shouted and scanned the area. The rancher froze for a heartbeat, assessing the risk, then whispered to the children to stay hidden behind a jagged outcrop. The boy's pulse thundered in his ears, but he obeyed, watching as the rancher acted with a calm decisiveness that both awed and reassured him. With swift, precise movements, the rancher led the children along a narrow ledge that overlooked the bandits' path. The boy marveled at his skill, the ability to navigate danger with measured risk. Every step required balance, courage, and trust, and he felt the weight of the lessons sinking deep into him. The sister, trembling yet determined, mirrored his caution, and together they moved silently. Shadows in the canyon. Hours later, they emerged from the pass into a secluded grove. The bandits had lost their trail, and silence reclaimed the land. The rancher allowed the children a moment to breathe, to drink water and rest, but he remained vigilant, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of renewed danger. The boy and his sister, exhausted yet exhilarated, began to grasp the subtle dynamics of survival, observation, patience, and trust in someone who knew more than they did. That night, as they huddled together beneath the stars, the boy looked at the rancher with a newfound respect. This man had risked everything for them, guided them with wisdom and skill, and protected them from threats they had only glimpsed. The sister, curled against her brother, felt a similar sense of safety and admiration. Fear was still present, but it was now tempered by trust and resilience. The rancher's silent decisions, his calm under pressure, and his quiet mentorship had begun to shape the children into survivors. Tomorrow, they would continue their journey, facing new challenges and tests of courage. But tonight, under the vast, starlit sky, they allowed themselves a brief moment of peace, knowing that together they could endure whatever dangers awaited in the relentless wilderness. The dawn broke cold and sharp, the air carrying a brittle edge that hinted at the challenges to come. The rancher rose first, as always, and surveyed the terrain with hawk-like focus. The boy and his sister followed, still heavy with sleep but aware that rest was fleeting in a world where danger lurked at every turn. The bond between them and the rancher had grown over days of travel, forged in silence, survival, and quiet trust. By mid-morning, they reached a rocky plateau overlooking a winding valley below. The boy froze at the sight of movement in the distance, figures riding fast, kicking up dust in pursuit. His heart raced. The bandits had regained their trail. The rancher's expression remained calm, but his eyes narrowed, analyzing distances, speeds, and terrain. He motioned for the children to stay low behind jagged rocks. Every instinct he had honed over years told him that the next few hours would determine whether they survived or became prey. The bandits descended into the valley, scanning for signs of their quarry. The rancher whispered instructions: stay hidden, move silently, and trust his guidance. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he clutched his sister's, but he mirrored the rancher's controlled movements. The sister, though terrified, watched him closely, her fear tempered by the reassurance of his calm authority. Every step, every breath, became an exercise in patience and discipline. The rancher led them along a narrow ledge, a path that gave them both concealment and the ability to observe the bandits without being seen. Suddenly, a loose stone rolled beneath the boy's foot. He froze, expecting the bandits to spot them immediately, but the rancher's quick reflexes saved the moment. He grabbed the boy's arm and pressed him down, whispering, "Breathe. Stay calm." The children learned quickly that panic was the enemy. That calmness, guided by someone experienced, could mean the difference between life and death. Hours passed as they navigated the treacherous plateau. The boy began to anticipate the rancher's moves, learning subtle signals and silent cues. The sister, meanwhile, discovered an inner courage, moving with quiet determination to keep up. The rancher taught them survival lessons on the fly, how to read tracks to predict movement, how to find water in hidden pools, how to use the landscape to their advantage. These lessons were not just practical. They were lessons in confidence, resilience, and trust. By late afternoon, the bandits were still searching below, unaware of the trio's concealed position. The rancher decided to move again, leading them along a ridge that sloped down toward a hidden stream. The children followed carefully, hearts pounding, muscles aching, but trust in the rancher's judgment kept fear from overwhelming them. Each step was a careful calculation, each decision a blend of instinct and experience. As the sun dipped low, they reached a grove of trees near the stream, a rare sanctuary from the harsh terrain. The children collapsed, exhausted yet alive, feeling a mix of relief and pride. They had survived another day, not just by hiding, but by learning, observing, and trusting. The rancher finally allowed a moment of rest, kneeling beside them to offer water and share silent reassurance through gestures and brief words. That night, under the stars, the boy reflected on how far they had come. He no longer saw the rancher as a distant protector, but as a guide, a mentor, and a steady presence in a world filled with chaos. The sister leaned against her brother, comforted not just by him, but by the rancher's quiet authority. Together, they had survived pursuit, learned resilience, and begun to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. Tomorrow promised new challenges. But the bond forged through shared danger, trust, and survival had grown stronger. The rancher's silent strength had not only protected them, it had transformed them. They were no longer helpless children in a perilous world. They were students of survival, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead. The next morning broke with a pale light that barely warmed the rugged terrain. The rancher had been awake for hours, scanning the horizon for movement while the children slept fitfully, still recovering from the tense pursuit the day before. Today, the journey would test not only their endurance, but also their ability to rely on one another and on the ranchers. Guidance like never before. By mid-morning, the trio approached a vast ravine, its sheer walls cutting sharply into the earth. A narrow wooden bridge, weathered and rotting, spanned the gap. The boy froze at its sight, fear gripping his chest. The sister clutched his sleeve, eyes wide with terror. The rancher studied the bridge silently, then turned to them. His calm, steady presence reminded them of what they had learned. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. "Step carefully," he said, motioning toward the bridge. The children obeyed hesitantly, following the rancher's lead. He went first, testing each plank before committing his weight. The boy followed, hands gripping the railing, heart pounding, while the sister moved slowly behind him, trusting both her brother and the rancher implicitly. Every creak of the bridge sent shivers down their spines, but the rancher's composed guidance kept panic at bay. Halfway across, a plank snapped under the boy's foot. He yelped, teetering dangerously, but the rancher grabbed him instantly, steadying him with a firm hand. The sister gasped, frozen in fear, until the rancher motioned her forward, reassuring her with a nod and a soft word. The ordeal became a lesson in trust and balance. They had learned to follow, to observe, and to act deliberately even when terror threatened to overwhelm them. Once safely across, the rancher led them down a narrow path along the edge of the ravine. The terrain was treacherous, loose stones threatening to give way underfoot, but each step taught patience, observation, and quiet courage. The children were learning that survival was a combination of awareness, skill, and trust in someone who had experience navigating the wild. By afternoon, the rancher noticed movement across the valley, dust rising from hooves and the distant sound of shouting. The bandits had regrouped and were searching again. He quickly guided the children into a cluster of boulders, using them as cover. The boy's heart pounded, but he followed every silent instruction, crouching low, learning to merge instinct with careful observation. The sister mimicked his movements, gaining confidence with each subtle cue. Hours passed in tense silence. The bandits' voices grew faint as they moved away, oblivious to the trio hidden in the rocks. The rancher finally allowed the children to breathe, offering water and guiding them to a small stream tucked between the boulders. Exhausted but alive, the siblings began to appreciate the subtle lessons of endurance, trust, and vigilance the rancher had been instilling. As evening fell, they made camp on a high ledge overlooking the ravine. The stars reflected off the distant river below, casting a sense of calm over the rugged landscape. The boy and his sister finally allowed themselves a measure of relief, the day's tension giving way to a cautious sense of accomplishment. The rancher, ever watchful, sat nearby, eyes scanning the horizon. He knew challenges would only grow, yet the trio had proven they could face danger together, surviving through courage, quick thinking, and unshakable trust. That night, as the children slept, the rancher's quiet vigilance underscored a truth they were only beginning to understand. Survival in this unforgiving world was not just about strength, it was about patience, observation, trust, and learning to act decisively when it mattered most. The bond forged in adversity had grown stronger, preparing them for the trials that lay ahead. The sun rose in a pale haze, casting the desert in muted tones of gold and gray. The rancher was already moving, scanning the horizon as the children followed sleepily, still sore from the previous day's crossing. Today, the journey would test their resilience in ways they had not yet faced, for nature itself had become an adversary. By mid-morning, the trio reached a narrow canyon, its walls rising sharply and closing in on the path. The rancher paused, sensing something in the air, the faint rumble of distant movement, the sudden stillness of the wind. He motioned for the children to stop, crouching behind a large boulder. Ahead, the ground trembled slightly, and a flash of dust appeared in the distance. The boy's heart raced. He had learned that danger could take many forms, not just the bandits. Without warning, a sudden flash flood surged down the canyon, water and debris tumbling violently. The rancher acted instantly, grabbing the children and pulling them to higher ground. The boy slipped, nearly swept away by the force, but the rancher's quick reflexes saved him. The sister screamed, clinging desperately to both her brother and the rancher. In moments like these, words were useless. Their survival depended on instinct, courage, and trust. Once the immediate danger passed, they clung to the rocks, soaked and shivering, the canyon now a chaotic river of mud and debris. The rancher assessed the situation, eyes sharp and calculating. The path ahead was destroyed, impassable without great risk. Yet he did not panic. Instead, he scanned the terrain for alternate routes, silently communicating his plan to the children. The boy nodded, understanding the importance of observation and careful planning under pressure. The trio climbed steep, rocky slopes, using every ounce of strength and balance. The sister struggled but pressed on, encouraged by the rancher's patient guidance. Each step was perilous. One slip could result in disaster. The boy learned to anticipate the rancher's movements, mirroring them to maintain balance, while the sister followed cautiously, learning the rhythm of careful, deliberate action. Survival was no longer just instinct, it was learned skill, reinforced under extreme conditions. Hours later, they reached a plateau above the canyon, exhausted but alive. The rancher allowed them a brief respite, drinking from a hidden spring he had located with practiced precision. The children sat in silence, overwhelmed by the ordeal, yet filled with a sense of accomplishment. They had survived not only pursuit by men, but the fury of nature itself. The boy's respect for the rancher deepened. The sisters' fear slowly transformed into admiration and trust. As evening approached, the rancher led them to a secluded grove, a safe haven from the chaos below. He built a small fire, its warmth a rare comfort after the day's trials. The children sat quietly, absorbing the lessons embedded in their struggle. Courage was not the absence of fear. Endurance was earned through hardship, and trust in those who guided them could be the difference between life and death. That night, under the canopy of stars, the boy whispered to his sister, "We're stronger now." "Because he's with us." She nodded silently, understanding what words could not capture. The rancher, ever watchful, kept his eyes on the horizon, knowing that the trials were far from over. But for the first time, the children felt a measure of confidence in their ability to survive, not as helpless captives, but as participants in a journey defined by courage, skill, and an unbreakable bond forged in adversity. Tomorrow promised more challenges, but they were ready. The lessons of observation, patience, and trust had begun to take root, preparing them for whatever dangers lay ahead in the unforgiving wilderness. The morning air was still, almost eerily calm, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The rancher rose before dawn, scanning the horizon with practiced vigilance. The boy and his sister stirred beside him, their bodies tired but their spirits steeled by the trials they had endured. Today would test them as never before, not just with danger, but with the choices they would have to make to survive. By mid-morning, the trio approached a narrow valley flanked by jagged cliffs. The boy spotted movement on the ridge above, figures silhouetted against the sky. The bandits had tracked them once again, relentless in their pursuit. The rancher's expression remained calm but determined. He had prepared for this moment. Without words, he signaled the children to stay low and follow his lead, demonstrating once more that silent guidance often spoke louder than instructions. The bandits charged, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The rancher positioned himself strategically between the children and the attackers, using the terrain to his advantage. Rocks, dips, and natural cover became tools in his arsenal. The boy and his sister, though terrified, followed his subtle signals, learning to move with purpose, to anticipate danger, and to act without hesitation. Every step was a lesson in courage and discipline. A skirmish erupted as the bandits reached the base of the cliffs. The rancher's skill with his firearm and knowledge of the land gave him the upper hand. He moved fluidly, positioning himself to protect the children while keeping the attackers off balance. The boy watched in awe as the rancher's calm precision turned what could have been chaos into controlled action. The sister clung tightly to him, learning in that instant that fear could be met with courage if guided by experience. After several tense moments, the bandits realized they were outmatched. They retreated, disappearing over the ridge in clouds of dust, leaving the trio shaken but unharmed. The rancher lowered his weapon, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of further threat. The boy and his sister breathed deeply, relief flooding them, but also a new understanding. Survival was no longer just about evasion, it was about courage, skill, and trust. As the sun began its descent, they reached a secluded plateau overlooking a small settlement in the valley below. The rancher led them down safely, navigating the final treacherous slopes with care. The children were exhausted but exhilarated, their fear tempered by the lessons they had learned. They had faced pursuit, nature's fury, and the constant threat of death, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. That night, under a sky ablaze with stars, the trio sat around a small fire. The boy looked at the rancher, gratitude and respect written across his young face. "We wouldn't have made it without you," he whispered. The rancher said nothing, but a faint smile crossed his lips. Words were unnecessary. The bond forged through days of hardship, fear, and trust spoke louder than anything. The sister leaned against her brother, feeling a sense of safety she had never known before. The rancher remained vigilant, yet there was a softness in his demeanor, a quiet satisfaction that came from guiding the children to safety, from protecting lives that were not his own, yet had become as dear to him as family died as they drifted into sleep beneath the vast desert sky. The boy and his sister understood something profound. Courage was learned, trust was earned, and even in the harshest wilderness, the right guide could turn despair into hope. The rancher's silent heroism had transformed them, teaching lessons that would last a lifetime. Tomorrow, the journey might continue, but the trio faced it not as frightened children and a stranger, but as a bonded unit, resilient, courageous, and ready for whatever challenges awaited in the wild, unforgiving world they now navigated together.